Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thanks so much for joining our webinar today to learn about tips and strategies for writing your statement of interest. My name is Renad Arif, and I'm the Assistant Director for Admission Recruitment here in the Graduate School of Education Admissions Office. So we've probably communicated before, perhaps we've had advisement, but if you're new here today, welcome to our session. We're hoping to be able to give you some more insider knowledge when you're writing your statement of interest and hopefully help you along the way when you are applying to graduate school. But before we get started, if you do have any questions along the way, you're welcome to type them in the chat. And my colleague here, Duvie Sanchez, is also Assistant Director for Admission Recruitment. She'll be monitoring the chat today in case something comes up while I'm presenting. I'm happy to take on those questions. And if not, we have a dedicated Q&A at the end, so we'll take on all your questions then as well. I will be sharing these slides after the presentation in addition to the recording, so you can review at a later time as well. Also, thank you again for joining us and thank you for your patience in starting up this session. So the goal for today is to really kind of dive into the statement of writing plan of action. So I know it's a high-stake document and there's a lot that goes into it. I was applying to graduate school myself, and I recall that daunting process of writing my statement of interest and how many drafts I had to do. So let's talk about the importance of the personal statement as well for graduate school applying. Oftentimes you'll see it written in different ways. So for application, you'll see it as a goal statement. Sometimes you'll see it written as statement of purpose. We call it in the Graduate School of Education a statement of education and career goals. So we want you to blend both into the statement. It's essentially all the same thing, just fancy ways of saying it. The goal really is to help faculty get to know you better. So we all know academics are important. So, you know, your grades and your GPA are always going to be the top of importance for your application, but it's the statement of interest that lets the faculty get to know you better as a candidate. It's also a writing sample if you think about it as well. So they get to see your writing skills through that written piece. So we're going to talk today about kind of the steps to forming your statement of purpose in addition to some resources that might be helpful to you. It's also a great opportunity for students to connect with the faculty by basically highlighting their accomplishments or skills. Your applications for graduate school may or may not require a resume. So if your program requires a resume, you know, you can showcase all your other experiences on your resume, but the statement of interest is a great way to highlight maybe one or two experiences that you've had that are relatable to your program of interest. So it also can showcase how you self-reflect and think critically. With the statement of interest, it's a great way to also fill the gap of any educational deficiencies you've had as well. So for example, if you're someone that maybe had a low GPA in their undergrad, had a life circumstance, or maybe death in the family, or something personal that came up that hindered their GPA, it's a great way to redeem yourself in that written statement to really explain, you know, what happened and how you went about spinning that into a positive note. So you don't want to commiserate in your statement of purpose, but you obviously want to highlight, you know, how you went about improving that GPA. So for example, if it was because you were in a difficult major that you didn't switch out of early enough, you can highlight that you maybe took additional classes in your other major, or that you did some community work that really kind of helped you along with finding your path. So those are great ways to really put a positive spin on something negative like a low GPA, but also a way to redeem yourself. And then finally, we call it the educational and career goals. So we want you to highlight your career goals, what you're planning to do after the program. So think of that question you get in a job interview. What is your 5-year career plan, right? So think about what is your 5-year goal after the program. You know, some students like to talk about they want to go on to a PhD, or perhaps they want to work in a clinical setting, or perhaps want to open up their own private practice or teach in a specific school. So definitely thinking through in more detail what is your long-term plan after the program. And most importantly, be true to yourself. You know, you don't want your statement of purpose to be too much fluff, but at the same time, you want it to be you know, clear, to the point, and also giving helpful examples about your experiences and weaving those together. We're also going to talk more about kind of this holistic review. So you'll often see this kind of a term we use in admission, So the statement of interest is a way to look at your softer parts of your application. So, the faculty can look at and see a really stellar student, that has all A's, but perhaps their writing is not the best. So really taking the time to focus on your statement of interest is important. Definitely have a second pair of eyes. I know when I was writing my statement of interest for graduate school, I was convinced I had the perfect draft after reading it hundreds of times, but you'll be surprised how many times you'll find mistakes or repetitive sentences and so on. So definitely have somebody proofread your essay, whether that's a colleague, a friend, family member, or maybe someone that you know within an institution. And it also really helps the faculty to see that, you write clearly, you avoid mistakes and so on in terms of punctuation, for example. It's the tiniest thing, but students that, for example, are applying to multiple schools are using perhaps the same statement of interest. I can tell you somebody that makes a mistake and puts, I'm applying to Buffalo State College's teacher education program when they're applying to UB's program here in GSE, even just the tiny mistake of putting the wrong school name, the wrong program can set off just a red flag to the faculty. So even making sure just in those tiny details about which school and which program you're applying to, that's included in your statement of interest, that it is the correct information. And then usually the essay prompts, you'll see that in some of the programs, they did revamp the statement of interest. So you might have an essay prompt you have to answer. So what that means is that there's maybe one or two or maybe three questions that the faculty committee wants you to weave into your statement of interest. So they may or may not have word counts. I'd say most of our essay prompts do. If you're applying for a teacher education program, they're typically going to have some essay prompt questions, and they will be related to the field of teaching, in addition to doctoral programs as well. So if your program does have an essay prompt question, make sure you're copying and pasting that into a Word document and taking your time to answer those questions carefully. But you don't necessarily need to keep the question in the essay. So when you do answer it in your statement of interest, you can remove the question. So you don't want it to be in the form of bullets. So even though there might be 3 essay prompt questions they want you to answer, you can put your notes and your paragraphs in a Word document as you're answering them, but then you want to kind of weave them together into a coherent essay in the final draft. So let's talk a bit about the structure of a statement of interest. I know there's different formats out there, but this is kind of the basic structure to put together a statement of interest. So you obviously want to have an introduction. You want to have an introduction to really introduce yourself and capture the reader. So you can do so by sharing a personal experience or a compelling story. So you do want to start strong. You don't want to start off with, I'm applying to graduate school because, it's such a bland statement. So think of an anecdote or something that's relatable to you to draw on your reader. The body, here's where you're going to fill in those examples. So think of 1 or 2 specific relatable examples that you have that are related to your program. So for example, if you're looking to become a teacher, maybe talk about the tutoring experience that you've had, or maybe you did something within the community that's relatable to teaching. And so just thinking about those 1 or 2 examples to put in your body paragraphs, but also addressing, why this specific school, why our program, and then how the program will help you reach your end goals. Of course, there's more that could be added here. For example, any essay prompts. So there's 1 or 2 essay questions they want you to answer. This is a good place to put it in the body paragraphs. And then, as you know, they're concluding a final part of the essays, more so your long-term goals, talking more into detail about what you plan to do after the program. And oftentimes, it might be hard to start off an essay. I know that writer's block kind of can come through, especially when you're writing such an important document. So a helpful tip here is to create a list of ideas. So think of some examples and just personal topics you may want to talk about. So start building on them to form paragraphs, but start off with some bulleted points just to kind of see what examples you might want to give. So if you have been involved in a lot of community work, you have a lot of experiences relatable to teaching and tutoring, think of all of those examples, and then towards the end, after you listed them, try to narrow down and see which ones you might want to include into the essay, that you have some more details to share about your experience in those. if you've been a part of a summer camp and you did some tutoring, or you were a coach for students in a camp, that's a great way to kind of showcase your interpersonal skills. So you were able to communicate with students of all backgrounds. So if you have some examples that you feel like you can really expand on, then those are the ones you'll want to keep in your statement of interest. If you're stuck, think of how others would describe you. I think that's a great way to really kind of formulate that, because it can be hard at first to kind of, think of all your accolades and then talk about them. I think that's one of the hardest parts that we can sometimes struggle with, but think of how family members or friends would describe you, and then go from there if you're feeling stuck. Let's talk about formats and styles. I know it's another big question we tend to get, how many pages, is there a word count? If your program does have a word count, it's typically because they have essay prompt questions they want you to answer. So if there are essay prompt questions, they will have word count. So it could be like up to 500 words, could be 300 to 400, but so just keep that in mind as you're writing your statement of interest. What happens if like you're 100 words over your essay prompt question? It's not the end of the world, or it's not detrimental for your admission. If it is, it's not at all. So don't worry if it's like over the essay prompt limit. It's just recommended to try to keep it within that range. As you know, the faculty committee are reading a lot of these, so it's a great way for them to kind of keep things within reason as they're reviewing. So on an average length of a statement of interest, I'd say anywhere from 2 pages to 3 pages, a minimum 2 pages, I would say, nothing less than that, when you're writing a statement of interest. If it doesn't have like a word count, I would stick to 2 pages, and no less than that. Font and spacing, there's no specific font that you have to use necessarily. If you like to use creative fonts that are maybe not legible, I would probably stay away from those, but stick to the ones that are, the kind of standard that you would use, for example, Arial or Calibri. But fonts are fine, as long as they're legible. And then it can be double spaced if you want to. There's no hard requirement that it has to be. And so that is kind of the general gist in terms of formatting and the font. See, we covered everything here. I think that's all in terms of the style and the format. The faculty committee are not too restricted in terms of the type of formatting you have to do necessarily. I'd say once you go to PhD level programs, for things like writing your statement of research, for example, it will be a lot more involved in terms of writing that paper as well. So we talked about some of the kind of formatting parts. Let's look into the common mistakes that we've seen. Students that think of it as an extended resume or CV. So if you're finding yourself, your statement of interest is like 8 or 10 pages long, it's way too long. So you want to definitely truncate that essay and try to stick to a 2 to 3 page range. But if you're finding that you're adding too many examples and there's just a lot of information there, try to keep that for your resume. So really stick to I'd say 1 to 2 experiences is great. If you want to add 3, that's fine. But 1 to 2 examples of experiences that you have, and then leave the rest of the experiences in your resume is a good guiding point to go by. And then expand on each experience and link them together. So if you can find a way to link those experiences together, that's a helpful way to make it a coherent essay. So I put this slide together. We actually pulled the faculty to see what are they looking for in terms of the statement of interest. This is my favorite one. Tell us what makes your heart sing. This actually came from one of the faculty in the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy. So that's a great way to illustrate things in terms of a statement of purpose. Tell us what makes your heart sing. So here's where you tell your narrative. So we mentioned that narrative in the beginning. So definitely want to start strong. So mix your personal with the academic in a creative way so that you stand out. So clear takeaway points to who you are as a person, be authentic, and make sure you have someone proofread. The second one here we received is be explicit about your research and your career goals, even if you're planning to explore a wide range of options. It's helpful for program faculty to learn about your research and career goals so that we know how our program, curriculum, and practice instruction can best support you in achieving those goals. So this is actually specific for the Curriculum Instruction and Science of Learning PhD program. So if you're applying for a PhD program, most likely you're going to have two written essays. So it's going to be your statement of interest and then that research statement, which really focuses more about what type of research you're looking to do and the faculty that you would like to work with. So having an idea who you might want to work with is important when you're writing your research statement, in addition to the faculty you want to work with. Some more quotes here. Tell us what you hope to gain from our program, which may include a blend of personal and professional aims. It is important for program faculty to begin getting to know you and understanding the myriad ways in which we can foster your personal and professional development. And the last one, you can reference the organizations you wish to join, the community engagement you wish to participate in, or specific faculty you'd like to work with, given their research interests and backgrounds, to name a few examples. So if you're part of organizations or affiliations here at UB, student clubs, and so on, those are some great things to add into your statement of interest. So in the next slides, we're going to talk about a resource here at UB that you may or may not know about, but we hope that you do. And that's for the Center for Excellence in Writing. They're going to be a really, I think, helpful and supportive office to you in terms of writing your statement of interest. And not only that, but in addition to your classes, you'll be able to go there for consultations as often as you'd like for your papers, your research, and so on. You can seek up to 3 appointments a week in the Center for Excellence in Writing, and then you should select a PhD level consultant. If you go to their website, you'll be able to schedule an appointment with them. So they have a schedule that you can conveniently go in and make an appointment. We'll talk a little bit about kind of the writing process when you are connected to the Center of Excellence in Writing. Sometimes students think that they may need like a full draft when they go to the CEW. You really don't necessarily need a full draft. You can even go as early as your discovery kind of phase. So even if you have like a couple sentences, or maybe you have a couple ideas that you just haven't really been able to kind of kickstart that first paragraph, that's totally okay to go with a discovery draft, even if it's a really, really rough draft. So starting earlier in the timeline will help you in terms of completing this in a timely fashion. So obviously you don't want to seek consultation from the writing center at the very end of the kind of admission cycle. So if the deadline is February 1 for your program, don't wait till January, for example, start writing your statement of interest. So I would give yourself a buffer period of a timeline of, give your own internal deadline when you want to be done with your statement of interest. So have a timeline of when you want to have your first draft so that you can go to the CEW and then go through that whole phase with them in terms of the advisement. So you can go to them with your very rough draft and they will guide you throughout the way. So you don't have to kind of stop at any point if you feel like you still need that support. So they can work with you all the way to the finalized stage of your paper. So with the statement of purpose, just so you know, it's, this isn't like a class essay, right? So it's going to be a high stake document, and it will be your ticket to help you get into a graduate school. Even though students may think that faculty don't read these or they're not important, they're actually very important. So I would take the time when you're really writing this and don't think of it as a light requirement. So there's a lot of things that go into the statement. So you might get anxious writing it, and especially having that writer's block, it can definitely be prominent starting off, and definitely writing anxiety. So for anyone that has gone through that, it's very real. So give yourself time and grace to work on that little by little. Don't feel like you have to sit down and that you have to write your introduction paragraph or be done with it by the end of the week. So don't feel obligated that you have to sit and do it all in one sitting. So definitely give yourself some time and do it piecemeal, like piece by piece. I would look at the requirements needed and do some low stakes writing. So if you like journaling, and I'm one of those people, so start jotting down some ideas. So if you're applying for a teacher education program, why do you want to become a teacher? Like, try to answer some of those simple questions to help you with adding those ideas into your essay without necessarily feeling pressure to start an introduction. So the examples you give in your statement of purpose are going to be important. So, think of a list of community work you've done or tutoring that you've done or any relatable experiences, and then kind of narrow it down to see what are the top two from that list that you can expand on. If you're finding that you've done some experiences for a very short period, but you don't have much to speak about them, then I would omit those. So I would try to stick to your top two of relatable experiences, whether that's internships that you've done, you shouted a counselor before, worked in a school, did coaching or like at the YMCA or something, worked with children in a daycare. All those things are great, but think of things that you could really expand on for those examples. And then think about that narrative. Like we talked about that storyline. So starting strong in your statement of interest is important. So even if you don't have very much to start with, going to the CEW will give you a plan of action. So they can actually help you with your writing skills, and they can tell you, how to structure things, especially if you're struggling with kind of forming paragraphs and so on. So they will work with you from start to finish. This service is available, I should mention, to current UB students, or I have found out that they do have an internal service for alum of UB. So if you graduate from UB and applying to another UB program, I would contact the director. I think it's still Rhonda Reed, and they have an internal service where they can actually review your statement of interest for you, as long as you're applying to another UB program. And they'll have PhD level advisors to assist you. And the nice thing is they actually have advisors for every program area at UB. So if you're applying to an education program, they will assign you to somebody from the education school. So that's a nice thing. You will have somebody that is specialized in the specific area that you're applying to. Like we mentioned, they have the PhD level assistants, so they are more high level assistants that can assist you with your writing, and it will help start off with that dialogue. Even if you just kind of go in with your ideas and you don't have anything written, that's okay as well. You could talk to the advisor and they can kind of help you through with how to kickstart your essay. And you don't have to have like we mentioned, the full draft just to seek out help from the CEW. Even just that early dialogue is helpful. So it's okay if you come in with a paragraph or even the bulleted points like we mentioned. Don't worry too much about word counts. Like I know if you're kind of thinking about the word counts or you're worried about that, you can put that off to the side. That you could revisit at the end, once it's time to finalize. So allow yourself to write without restricting yourself, because I feel like if you think of word counts or like I have to stick to 2 pages, and if I go over, it's not good. So don't worry about word counts or that page count or anything like that. So you can really allow yourself to think freely when you're writing your statement without feeling kind of constricted or that like you have to shorten your ideas or anything. So for example, if you went over by 100 words, that's okay. You probably won't notice in the beginning, but towards the end, that's when you'll go into the CW again to get that final essay kind of proofread, and then they can help you with kind of cleaning up your essay. Sometimes you repeat yourself with sentences and so on. So cleaning up any fluff paragraphs and so on, they will be able to assist with that. And the process of revision, like I mentioned earlier, when I was applying and I wrote mines, I read mine so many times and I was convinced that there were no mistakes. But each person that I had read it over found some mistakes, whether that was punctuation or perhaps some repetitive sentences. So you'll be surprised. I think when we read it in our own kind of voice, it's easy to just kind of gloss over like even just minor punctuation and things like that. So having other people read it is always helpful too, in addition to experts at the CEW. And we mentioned the anxiety that comes through from writing a statement of interest, or if you struggle with time management. I think if you piece it into smaller, less daunting paragraphs, you'll be able to kind of smoothly work through that essay. So I think a helpful tip here, we're trying to give yourself 15 minutes and do some free writing. So have you ever done this before? So put yourself a timer and give yourself a specific task. So today I'm going to focus on why I want to apply to become a teacher, and why to this specific school. So put that 15-minute timer on and just do some free writing and see what ideas come up. And you'll be surprised that by the end of the 15 minutes, you'll have some ideas that you can go by, or perhaps even a paragraph that is in a very rough draft that you can start as your essay. So give yourself that 15 minutes of free writing to kind of help you if you're struggling with especially time management, or perhaps you're feeling that that writer's block. So I think that's a great way to start off. So final tips for you, and like we mentioned, if you have any essay prompts for your statement of interest, copy and paste those into a Word document and start off with some bulleted points, especially if there are examples that they want you to include. And then having that thoughtful storyline is important to draw in your reader. So when you go into education, you do want to make an impact in the world, right? So think about what you as a candidate can bring to the field of education. So that's another thing that you might want to kind of try to answer in your statement of purpose. What kind of impact can you bring to the field of education? And then finally, put yourself in the reader's shoes. So like I mentioned, the faculty are reading so many of these. So if you were the faculty committee, how would you draw in your reader when you are writing that statement of interest? So if you're starting off in a generic way, I'm applying to graduate school because you don't want to start off that way. So thinking of an example or an anecdote, because those are the most vivid and people are more likely to remember it. So for example, say that the person that's reading your statement of interest finds that you learned about the education field because of your retired grandma that was an educator, and you were baking pies that day. So even if it's just like just a silly anecdote that you were baking pies with your grandma who's retired, who's a retired educator, and that's what inspired you to become a teacher. So whether it's a funny anecdote or a family member that's in the field of education, whatever the case may be, starting off with something relatable is always great to leave that memorable impact. And then take a risk. Like if you feel, if you're not sure if your example would be like your anecdote is something that will draw on your reader or not, try it out, and then have another person read it, and then see what they say. Go to the writing experts at the CW, and they can give you some feedback about that. And especially when we talked about earlier, the statement of interest, filling the gap of like other educational deficiencies, for example, lower GPAs. If you find that you're just commiserating about your past GPA, you haven't really put a positive spin on it, others will be able to pick up on that. So make sure that you're putting a positive spin on any kind of personal circumstance that you had. But it's a great way to, I think, let the faculty know that you had gone through some things and, that you've triumphed from that. So I think it says a lot about students that are, trying to fill the gap from any deficiencies they've had through past experiences, internships, and community work. Our faculty really like to see well-rounded students. So if you're somebody that, maybe something happened in your undergrad, but you've overcome it through a lot of community work and you've really been involved in the field of education in different ways, it really says a lot. So, don't think of the GPA as the end all. Like we tell students, you can really redeem yourself through the statement of interest in addition to the past positive experiences that you've done to showcase those skills. And then, the GPA, makes a good impression, but also your statement of interest is going to make, is going to confirm that first impression of you as a candidate. There might be some programs that have an interview phase, but for the most part, I think your statement of interest kind of is like a pre-interview stage way of getting to know you better. So I think if you take the time to really write that statement of interest, it will be worthwhile when you're applying to graduate school. So that kind of concludes the essay writing, some tips for applying to kind of applying those into the essay. If you aren't a UB student just yet, you unfortunately won't be able to access the CEW until you're accepted and enrolled as a student. But if you are here at UB, you're an alum of UB as well, you'll be able to access the CEW. If your school has a writing center, I would definitely utilize it, especially if you're still enrolled in your undergrad. That's a great way to have someone else read it as an expert in the writing. Like I said earlier, you can also have colleagues or friends. If you have a current advisor from your undergrad that can read it over, of course, if they are allowed to or have the time, I think those are some helpful people to, have them give a second pair of eyes, like I mentioned earlier. And then I put the contact here for the CEW if you want to reach out to them. If you're a current UB student, like I mentioned, you can make an appointment on their website. But there's a lot of resources online, especially if you're kind of looking for the formats of how to piece things together, the format of the paragraphs. But the general one that we gave earlier is kind of the core basic way to put together your statement of interest. I've also put our contact here. So if you want to set up an advisement appointment, whether that's for the program that you're applying to, or you're just kind of struggling with some things with the application requirements, let us know, and we're here to support you along the way. I do see here some questions that have come through in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but we hope you found this session helpful. So we'll go ahead and take on your questions.